Joanna Toch here with Family Law Cafe podcast. Today I'm delighted to have Matt, who works for a creative agency called The District, and most importantly he's been through the family law system a couple of times, and kindly he's agreed to come on the podcast to talk about his journey as a father through the family law system. We're not going to get into too much specifics about his cases, but more the experience he has had. So where there are details, we might change a few details. Obviously, we don't want to talk about matters that might be personal. But Matt, really delighted that you've come along today. So
No
tell us about you, so we can find out a little bit about you first, and then we're going to talk about your journey.
Okay. Thanks for the introduction. My name's Matt. I run a creative agency in Cambridge called The District. We do branding and film and animation and websites and stuff like that. But the reason I'm on here today is because I'm a father of two, a 12-year-old boy and a 5-year-old girl, which is a bit crazy. But yeah, that's why I'm here today, to talk about some of the experiences I've had in your safe hands and how they've affected my life and my journey going forward, really.
Thank you, because obviously in family law, the cases are held in private, and so people that come into the system may not know what they're getting into.
Exactly.
We've had experience working together. Firstly, you came to me, I think, midway through your first case, and I worked as a barrister in the case and finished, I think, did 2 hearings,
That's right.
2 or 3 hearings just towards the end, did the final hearing. And I remember it was very hard, that, you found that first decision quite hard. And then when something else happened, you came to us at Family Law Cafe, and we saw you through that system, and I think you felt it was better overall. Would that be fair?
That would be absolutely fair. Going back to the start of where it all started for me, I've had 2 cases, as you said. One was that I went to court for custody of my son because I had concerns over his parenting from the other side, and there was elements of enmeshment and sort of control for me, so I wanted to sort of end that. And the second one was where I was defending myself against some allegations that was stopping me from having contact with my son. Both cases very different, but as you sort of said, the most concerning thing is when it hits you and you realise that you've got to do something about it, or that letter lands on your doormat suggesting that you've got to defend yourself against something. And that's the moment that throws you into a headspace that you're not used to. You don't know really what to do. You don't know really where to go. And I started to go down the usual routes of contacting a local solicitor, going through those routes of paying for a half-an-hour meeting or paying for an hour on the phone, and then being passed around from pillar to post and not really ever feeling understood or listened to or cared about. It was very much, I was just a number in their system. And it wasn't until I was introduced to Family Law Cafe and yourself where everything became a lot clearer, a lot more easy to understand, a lot more reassuring. I felt a lot more empowered and much more in control of my own destiny, rather than just hoping and praying that someone on the end of the phone was going to help me. Yeah, very different experience.
So in that first set of proceedings, why did it go to court? Was there a moment, you took it to court the first time?
Yeah, sorry, I'm very sweaty. It'll die down in a minute.
Probably remembering the experience.
It was,
yeah.
The first case of when I realised I had to go to court to try and do something about it was, as a dad that was having access to my son every other Friday to Sunday, that was something I very much looked forward to having. When I was younger, I always wanted to be someone that was able to bring my family up on a full-time basis, and to have that sort of ripped away from me and not to be a possibility with my son was something that always stayed with me. So having those special moments every Friday to Sunday was some of my most happiest times in life, and to have them taken away from me by a phone call saying my son's not going to come with me anymore, because he doesn't want to come and visit you. He doesn't feel easy with the change from his home where he lives and coming to mine. And it was something that you just don't agree with, you don't understand, and you think that some foul play may be in play. So the only choice you've got is to go through the legal proceedings to try and put an end to that and try and reinstate access. And
Yeah. So you were in a situation where you were seeing your son every second weekend, and then you were told that's not going to happen. And how long had you been having that? I mean, you were the non-resident parent, because that's a term that's used in court. So you use resident parent and non-resident parent.
That's right.
So you were the non-resident parent. There'd been a separation.
Yeah.
You were seeing your son from Fridays to Mondays. Was it Fridays to Mondays?
Fridays to Sunday evenings.
Fridays to Sunday evening. So every second weekend. So quite a I'd say typical arrangement. And
I'd been doing that from the age of 6 months old to this, and it started to happen at around 6 years.
Yeah.
So I'd been having consistently for 5.5 years.
5.5
on
years.
my own terms, yeah.
And did you expect that to happen?
I mean, yes. Yeah. I mean, the journey from 6 months to 6 years was very turbulent. It was not easy going at all. Hurdles are put in place that you have to jump over, rings that you have to jump through. You have to bite your tongue. Unfortunately, my ex-partner was very controlling, very manipulative, very aggravated, very angry. You had to really tiptoe around the situation to ensure that I did have continued access to my son. So it wasn't like a surprise. It was just sort of, it had ramped up to a new level. And that's when things got serious, really.
So you weren't able to have the contact that you had previously been having. Was any reason given for stopping it?
I think the reasons were, as I said, sort of superficial reasons that almost you could pick out of the sky. He doesn't like his bedroom. He doesn't want to travel in your car. It's too far. He's ill. He's poorly. A multitude of reasons.
There's a multitude of reasons that didn't really seem to hold up.
No, and when they're happening week after week after week after week, then you've got to step in and do something. Otherwise, it's all about having control, I guess, and that's what I've learned in hindsight. It's all about getting back control, really. Yeah,
I think that often I would say that there's this battle for control between parents. It is a feature of family proceedings, and obviously the judges will say, that it's the welfare of the child. But that does seem to be forgotten. It does seem to be who is holding the balance of power.
It does. It does very much. Yeah, I agree.
And so you first approached a solicitor to help. What was that experience? Oh, no. Before that, did you go to a mediator or anything like that?
I did. Yeah, I did. Before my son was born, very close to his birth, as a last chance to try and salvage the relationship, we went to 12 weeks of relationship
so there's more counselling between about your relationship.
It was, as a last ditch attempt really to salvage what I always wanted, which was the ability to bring my son up in a family unit, in a happy family unit. So it was an opportunity to try and quash whatever the problems were between me and my
So you tried very hard by going to Relate, which is the usual place I think most people would go to save a relationship. That didn't work. When the difficulties around arrangement, so you negotiated it between you well, I suppose, for 5.5 years.
We did.
Then it broke down. You said that was very challenging. Were you ever instructed to go to a mediator, someone that would mediate between you as to arrangements?
Yes. I think as the ball got rolling with applying to court and suggesting that's what the route we were going to go down, I think the courts were sort of the mindset of promoting that we did that to try and solve those issues before it had to take up some of the court's time. I think the situation had got to a point where mediation just wasn't going to be really an option, and that's because of the turbulent relationship between myself and my ex-partner. It just, being in the same room wasn't really an option. Just how bad it had got, really. It was quite physical. It would give me enormous amounts of anxiety. The idea of being sat opposite someone that could potentially do anything to me or say anything about me, I wasn't prepared to really do that.
Did you have any physical response to that whole situation?
In what way do you mean? What physical response?
I just remember something you saying, that you had a Fitbit and you would go near and then it would go to such a level that
Yeah.
the alarm would go when you went to collect
That's
your
right.
child.
That's right.
It's something
Yeah.
that stands out in my mind.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, and that's one of the main reasons I couldn't do that mediation. I did have a Fitbit back in the day when the Fitbits were a thing. And that just shows how it was a consistent thing in my life. When I used to go and pick him up, as I'd stop the car engine, it would go off. It would alarm off that your heart rate is too high, you know. And that just shows the anxiety that I had ongoing. And that's a great thing from having a court order or going through the process, that when you get that piece of paper or that control back, or, you know, for want of a better word, you know, my Fitbit wasn't going off anymore, for want of a better terms. You know, your heart rate is not going to the level as it was, because you have some sort of control, some sort of reassurance, some sort of bit of paper that says, you know what, we've acknowledged that this is your son. You have equal right to spend as much time with him as the other parent, and, you know, you're worthy, you know. Yeah, that was a massive reassurance for me to get that piece of paper and to have that reassurance.
That's really interesting, because obviously the government wants people to sort it out by themselves, and the Children Act of itself was designed to give parents control, and it would only, the no order principle, there'll only be an order where it's better for the child. So what you've pointed out, that before you had a court order, your anxiety levels were so high at handovers that you'd be told your heart is too high.
Yeah.
You had evidence of that, but once you had the order, or later on when you had an order, you wouldn't get to those levels of anxiety. That's very interesting.
I mean, it's interesting that they say that the parents should sort it out themselves, and I agree with that. In an ideal world, that would be the case, wouldn't it? But I mean, I think it's not always an ideal world, and there's people out there that, you know, don't have a lot of patience and maybe have an anger problem or whatever, and that's just not going to work with two people coming together that obviously don't like each other much because they're split up for a reason. You know, they're not all of a sudden going to see the light and go, do you know what, I'm going to get on with this person like best mates and everything's going to be fine and we're all going to sort this out and the children are going to be fine, because there is coming together that's it's not beneficial to having that sorted out. So
I'm going to throw something at you, and I'm really interested in your view about this, because it's sometimes said that a child will pick up on anxiety levels of parents. So there are cases where one parent will be saying there is alienation of a child, and another parent will say, no, I always ask them to go to contact. I'm trying to promote contact, but they don't want to go, and it's their view. And what is sometimes said by experts is that a child can pick up on anxiety levels, let's say, of the mother who's anxious about the child going, or obviously could pick up on the anxiety levels of the father. Is that something that you think may have been a feature here?
The short answer is yes. The long answer is that I'm very, very thankful that I don't feel that my son has been affected as much as he could have been. With the amount of stuff that I've seen him experience firsthand, the language I've heard him expressed, you know, physical, mental, manipulation and stuff like that. I thank my lucky stars, actually, that he's turned out how he has. I do think that the cause of the first court case, particularly when it was sort of talked about that he doesn't want to come and he's not happy at yours and he'd rather stay at home, as much as I understand that in my head to be far-fetched, and maybe the words of the mother that doesn't want him to come with me and is doing a certain amount of weaponising with him against me, I do think there probably is a little bit of truth in that. And I think as my son's got older and I've been able to talk to him a lot more around the situation of coming to our home, it's become very apparent that he is aware and is very potentially a different person to a certain extent in both of those different places. And he does still to this day have a little bit of a problem of leaving that scenario there where he might act a little bit like this and wear clothes like that and have friends like this and have his mum looking after him and his family looking after him like that, and then coming to my house and maybe doing all of those things ever so slightly different. And I think that's, however slightly different they are, I think it's a big thing for a young child from the age of 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, which is the time we're speaking about, where he's probably witnessed a lot of these changes. I think he's dealt with them incredibly well. And I don't think, luckily, touch wood, it's affected him negatively too much. But you can definitely see why children would struggle with the two different environments. Yeah. Definitely.
Be very different. And there are situations where, because there's a lot of talk about co-parenting, but there's also another phrase, which is parallel parenting.
Oh, right.
So there are two ways in each house. And certainly there are cases I see where it's commented on that a child behaves one way with one parent and one way with another. And it's just that those parents just cannot co-parent for whatever reason. So it's interesting. And spoiler alert, you now have a shared care order, don't you?
I do. And it's one of the best things that's ever happened to me, really. It really is. Should I talk a bit more about my shared care order?
Yeah, I think, well, I just putting that in, because I think it would be interesting to get to discuss how you got there. So you have a shared care order, you have, because there's a little bit of distance between the homes, you have more time in the holidays now.
That's right.
And then there's a pattern in term time, because I don't think you have time in the week in term time, because it wouldn't work because of the distance.
Too far, the distance is too far.
Yeah.
I mean, the shared care order, as I said, is one of the best things that's ever happened to me. And we talked a little bit about the start about having some control and managing your own anxiety, and, you know, having consistent contact with my son has always been paramount to me. The shared care order actually came through an interesting way, because the shared care order came at the end of the second case that I had. Yeah. And the second case I had was the one where I was defending myself. So at the end of the first case that I went to, I wanted full custody of my son. I believed that he was in danger. I believe there was some stuff that was happening that I didn't really want him to be around.
Yeah.
And for one reason or another, I mean, we can go into detail if you need, but at the end of that case, I was unsuccessful. I then had a period of about 2 years of where things were okay. I think the first court case had softened down a little bit of the confrontation between me and my ex, and everything was going well. And then out of the blue, my ex-partner rang me and said that she'd had a call, an anonymous call, to say that my son was in danger when he was in my care. And that's when the second case kicked off, because I immediately rang you. I remember ringing you very clearly and saying, "Hello, it's me again, Joanna. You know, hi, how you doing?" And I was like, "No, it's not one of those phone calls. It's serious, and this has happened." And, you know, and that's what's so good about being with someone like Family Law Cafe and knowing someone like you, is that when this sort of thing happens, for want of a better word, when the shit hits the fan, to be able to ring you and speak to a human being that knows me and knows my case and knows my family and knows what I've been through, to go, okay, cool, totally get it, this is what we're going to do, bam, 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 bam. And within a week, I was in court contesting the fact that I wasn't able to see my son for completely false allegations against his security and well-being whilst he was with me, and it was immediately reinstated. Without having that connection with Family Law Cafe and knowing you and your team, where would I be? I'd be ringing random solicitors in my local town who knew nothing about me and knew nothing about the case, and I could have been without seeing my son for 3, 4, 5 weeks, 2 months, 3 months, who knows? Yeah. Who knows? But and that's when I had to go to court for the second time eventually to defend myself against these allegations. And it was with your advice to say, you know what, you know, instead of just defending yourself, why don't we go a little bit on the other side as well, because the courts have a background of the first case. They have an enormous amount of stuff that I'd gathered, evidence I'd gathered to try and bolster my first account. It was all already there, documented as this is what these two individuals have been up to previously. So that was already there. And to harness that into the second case and go, do you know what? All of this is completely untrue, what you're trying to defend yourself. Let's take the advantage of this and go for more control and more time with my son. And that's where we went for the shared care order, which previously it was, lives with mum, visits dad. And that always didn't really sit that well with me. I always wanted to be seen as an equal, and it always sort of grated on me a little bit that it was, even the wording of it, lives with mum, visits dad. It's like, it does make you feel like a bit part player.
Part-time, yeah.
Yeah. And that was one of the best bits of advice I think you've ever given me, and I'll always be very grateful for that. Is that the outcome of that case was I was completely acknowledged to be 100% innocent to the horrible allegations that were being put towards me. And on the flip side of it, I got a much improved order. I got a 50-50 care shared order. I got more time in the holidays, completely split 50-50, and more importantly, guaranteed visiting from every Friday to every Sunday. There was no need for the Fitbit to go off anymore. Do you know what I mean? There was nothing that she could do to stop me.
Yeah.
So I was empowered to be the dad that I always wanted to be, I guess. There's nothing going to get in the way of that.
And it's a great relationship now, as I understand.
With me and my son, yeah, it couldn't be better, yeah. And as I said, I've got a 5-month-old little daughter now. So he's just simply the best big brother you could ever want. We're just such a tight family. There's so much love in the room. As soon as he comes through the door on a Friday, he's straight over to my daughter, picks her up straight away. Hello, darling, kiss, and her face just lights up. And just to see those moments and have them guaranteed, I mean, that is what really for me life's all about, seeing those. And, I'll come downstairs from having a shower and he'll be on the sofa giving her a bottle with a big grin on his face. And, you just can't beat that. You really can't.
So to getting there, I mean, when you called us the second time, obviously I knew about it, but in any way that I would for any case, it's a bit like an audit I do. If something comes in, there are some people obviously who were put in that position, and we will then see what the resources are. But what I would say is it's really important to be fast, and the first part of a case can form it. So the first thing that happens is it is important, because otherwise things can drift. And if you're not in a position to do something quickly, you could have been in a position where you weren't having time with your son. That would have set up what's called a new status quo. It would have been, then you would have been on the back foot. But what we did there was I found you a barrister. I think they and we got in. I said, you've got to get this in now.
Yeah.
We agreed that you wouldn't go to collect you were due to collect the next day. It happened on Thursday. You were due to collect on Friday. So we had a little plan that it would be agreed that you wouldn't collect. You'd let the school know, and I think he was told you had COVID or something like that.
That's right,
and that was agreed with the mother. So it was agreed you wouldn't go to collect. I think you might have had video contact, and it was all kept as normal.
It was.
And then we put the application in, I think, on the Monday. And I think the hearing might have been either that week or the next as an emergency hearing.
I think
and
it was
done
that
by
Thursday.
video.
Yeah, and it was done by video link,
Yeah, and just to say that all of your hearings, apart from one, which we'll go back and talk about in a minute, but they've all been before magistrates, haven't they?
That's right.
Yeah, so this has been considered as a very standard case. And if you don't know that cases start with magistrates and they only get elevated to a district judge if they're considered to be complex. So I think at least over half of cases are dealt with by magistrates. So this is the usual experience. But we managed to establish that although the mother was saying there that this was the advice of social services, it was really that she just phoned them and said, well, I've had this anonymous call. And I think the social services had said, well, look, you've got to make a decision.
It's your call, yeah.
Your call. And thankfully, the justices accepted that there shouldn't be any disruption to your time, that the parties should then be able to put their evidence in. I think it was then listed about a month later, and then and for CAFCAS to look at it. And then as matters developed, it became absolutely plain there was just no foundation to this, I mean, if we can put it simply. And I think you invited, under my suggestion, invited the mother to try and agree this. Let's not take this further.
Absolutely.
But I also said this is an opportunity for you to move forward, even though this must have been deeply unpleasant for you to face these allegations.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, both of the cases have been quite complex. I mean, as I said, the first one is where I felt like I was trying to defend my son against what was happening to him, and the second one was, as you said, very much defending myself against allegations. Yeah, I mean, as you just said, sorry, I don't know. It's just a bit upsetting.
What's coming to mind?
Oh,
Trying to agree this. I know that the second one, well, I think both of them you found incredibly stressful, and you just wanted to sort it out. I think in about 4 months after this had happened, even though you were seeing your son regularly, nothing had changed. You know, there was a cost as well, wasn't there? And the stress and the worry. But it went to a final hearing again, didn't it?
yeah, both cases went to a final hearing. I think they're both very anxiety inducing, and actually thinking about some of the detail of it actually now is actually bringing back some of the emotions actually. But when you're accused of something that's completely untrue and it's stopping your happiness in life, I just talked about having access to my son to ensure that I'm a consistent parent. It's one of the darkest, saddest places to really be. And I remember telling my mum about these accusations and the fact that I can't go and pick my son up. And it's not about the damage it just does to you; it's about the damage it does to your wider circle as well.
Yeah.
And I remember seeing my mum break down, and seeing my son for her was nearly as important as it was for me. Her first grandchild. So it does affect all parts of life. It affects the partner, my partner that I was with. The first court case I went through 5 years of emails and voicemails and text messages, sat on the sofa next to my partner, and for night after night, and you end up reading some really, really hurtful things, and that puts stress on your relationship. In an ideal world, I had a new partner. Do you really want to be spending the first few months of your relationship sat on the sofa next to your new man, like, who's sobbing, looking at the text messages of stuff that he's been called and accused of and labelled with? It affects all elements of life. It affects your work life. I'm at work and I'm receiving calls from the court saying, "Oh, your court date's here," or I have a letter turn up at my mum's house and she says, "Oh, you've got another letter from the court." Every day you're thinking that something is going to happen. There's going to be a new twist. There's going to be a new court paper arrive that says you've done this or you've done that, or you can't see this person till then, or your court date's moved from here and moved to there, or you need to provide this document by then and by then. Like, the case space that you've got at Family Law Cafe is a saving grace in terms of controlling all of those elements that I talked about. Documentation, evidence, voicemails, telephone calls, anything that's happened, court dates, deadlines, everything on that case space is documented and enables you to have full control over what's happening rather than be surprised by another element. But it still didn't take everything away. Even I'd be at work and your case space gives you an alert every time you've made a message or said, right, now we need to provide this, or now you need to provide that. Even I'd get a message from the case space and it would, like, if I was still wearing a Fitbit, that would probably go off. Going through these matters is horrible. But with Family Law Cafe, it makes it as least horrible as possible, I guess.
Yeah, and I know that because people haven't been through it and there's not enough knowledge out there, what I'm trying to create is that you have that safe space, you put the message from the court, and I can then say, yeah, that's fine, that's kind of normal. I mean, in another matter, it was a couple of weeks ago, the court just made a mistake. It sent out a hearing date for February when it should have been October. And of course, this poor customer who saw that. I was like, no, it's fine, and we sorted it out. But that was devastating for him, going through that journey and thinking he had to wait for 3 or 4 months. It was just a mistake, and we knew that, but he didn't.
But I think you mentioned the letters that come through, like the lingo and the terminology the courts use, it's so confusing, and just adds to the anxiety even more. Like you can't read a court letter. Well, I personally can't read one and completely understand it.
And yet you're very well educated and capable and successful. And so, and they try to make it simple, but it's just not possible. I think even sometimes they can make it so simple, and I'll look at it and think, what does it mean? There's certain court forms that are they look simple, but they're not.
That's why it's really reassuring with you guys to take a picture of the letter, drop it on the case space. Within an hour, I get a message from you saying, that's fine.
Yeah.
And that's all you need.
Usually is fine.
That's all you need. Someone to go, that's fine.
Yeah.
But if you haven't got that, you're reading it, you're rereading it, you're passing it to your partner. What does that mean? You give it to your mum, you give it to the milkman, the newsagent. Can you make head and a tail of it? Do you know what I mean? To have someone like you or your team just to go, yep, fine, don't worry about it. Or, no, we need to do something now. We need to do something by next week. Or we need to do something by next month. But to understand it, to get it, I mean, it's just, so reassuring to have that.
It drag you back into that first set of proceedings, just make a couple of last points. There was a time when I came into it and there was a possibility that there'd be a fact-finding hearing, and the court had said, we'll produce your evidence. And I know the judge didn't agree to that. It went up for a judge to decide that. And she didn't agree to that. And the final hearing then took place very soon after that, maybe about 6 or 8 weeks. So we did try to appeal that decision, but there wasn't time. We went ahead with the final hearing. How did you feel when that fact-finding was refused?
Absolutely devastated. I just talked about days of going through old emails, text messages, voicemails. I had lots of stuff to back up my concerns that showed very clearly that there was bad stuff going on regarding my son, forcing him to say stuff on voicemails, aggressive text messages, threats, emails. I'd gone through all of that and gathered the most pertinent, picture showing, array, diverse communications that showed the points I was trying to make on the court papers. To go through all of that, to gather it all, to collect it all, to put it on a disc, to type it all out, to highlight it all, to have that, there you go, please read that, and for someone to go, no. I mean, it sucks all the life out of you. I mean, it just makes you think, okay, cool, what am I doing here then? What's going on? Why wouldn't I be listened to? Why wouldn't I, if I was confident that my son was in danger and the family courts are supposed to be only caring about the well-being of that child, why would they not be listened to? Why would there not be a fact-finding where I would have the ability to showcase them, for the judge to listen to them, for the judge to read them? I don't get it. I still don't understand it. I don't think I ever will understand it.
Another feature of that case was you were confined to a county, weren't you, to have your for a period. When I came into it, there'd been an order that you could have the weekends. Yeah. But you had to stay within the county and not go over the county border. I could not take him back to my county where I lived, Overnight.
For overnight, yeah.
But you could in the day.
Well, it didn't mention that I could or couldn't in the day, and that became a problem eventually. But the ruling was I could go and pick my son up, but he had to stay in the same county that he lived.
And you were in the adjoining county.
And I was in the adjoining county. And yeah, luckily I got a good relationship with a young lady farmer on Airbnb, and I was staying in a pretty much a horse box every Friday for about 3 months with a young son. Luckily he found it quite an adventure. There was horses in the field outside the cow shed, and we had a little kitchenette in there, and a bed and a shower, and it did us all right. I mean, it cost me an arm and a leg every Friday, but I just, still to this day, I mean, I don't understand of what benefit that was to to anyone. And ultimately, we'd wake up in the morning and just go across the border into the county that I lived in anyway. So he could see his grandma and he could see his family and he could see his friends and have as normal time with me as he normally would, really.
So at the end of that one, you did get your weekends again at the end of, and the final hearing with the more recent one, which was a couple of years later, and that both took about 9 months to a year, I think, both of them.
I think the first one slightly over a year, and the second one slightly under a year.
Yeah, and I think the magistrates awarded you shared care. They awarded you extra time.
Yeah.
It's all gone well after that, and I think we also suggested there be an order that neither parent bring this back without permission. They didn't make that order, but I think they basically said, we don't want to see either of you in court.
They did, yeah. It would have been nice to have got that, an extra bit of reassurance that we'd never go back to court. I don't think we will, touch wood. But yeah, the courts very much did sort of look at both of us and say, we don't want to see your faces again. Yeah, very much so. Yeah.
Okay, Matt, it's a happy ending, and thank you so much for sharing all of that. I hope that other people going through the process will find it very useful and helpful. I know it's been very personal. I'm sure it's brought up a lot of issues. I am going to ask for your tolerance. So we have our next guest on the next podcast who's going to come and ask you some questions, someone you haven't met before.
Okay.
And who's been listening into part of this. He's called Konrad Rotthege. He's got a completely different business. He has a business which is like Family Law Cafe, but for moving house. So it's called Conveyo. So I'm going to introduce you, and he's going to just ask you a few questions just to finish off. Thank you.
No problem.
Hi, nice to meet you, Matt.
Nice to meet you too, Konrad.
Pleasure. Well, to give you a little bit of background about myself, I'm a M&A and property lawyer and turned tech entrepreneur about 2 years ago.
Cool.
And we're bringing a fresh wind to conveyancing with our company that is called Conveyo.
Awesome.
Now, I'm curious to hear a bit more about your experience. You turned to Family Law Cafe, which is an innovative way of dealing with family matters. So I'd be curious to hear more about your experience, and maybe in the first step, how did you even find Family Law Cafe?
Very good question. Thinking back to how I found them, it was a godsend really that I did find them, and I actually found them through reaching out. Basically, I was going through a court proceedings where I was trying to get full custody of my son. I believed him to be in danger to a certain extent, and being brought up in a way that I felt wasn't really productive. So I looked out for certain coaches out there that specialised in narcissism or coercive behaviour or enmeshment, and I actually found this lady that had written books about it. And through her extensive experience of writing and looking into it and looking into solicitors and barristers and people that were on the same wavelength as her, she identified Joanna, the head of Family Law Cafe. And it was her introduction through her to meet Joanna to introduce me to Family Law Cafe, and just made the whole process a lot more simple, a lot more informal, a lot more human. They gave me the ability to pick up the phone and speak to someone that knew my case, and I wasn't a number anymore. I wasn't just on a waiting list waiting to speak to a barrister that knew nothing about me, or being charged £30 an hour to go and sit with a complete stranger and regale my story again for the second time. So that's how I found Family Law Cafe, purely through a connection with someone else, and the rest is history, really, I guess.
Very interesting. So you've already mentioned some of the benefits that Family Law Cafe provided you with in your with your request. Now, just to take a step back, when that lady referred you to Family Law Cafe, what were the intentions there? Did you at that point in time complain about the process that you had experienced so far, and you were unhappy with that, or tell us what kind of mindset you were in when you actually made the change?
I don't think that the lady that recommended Family Law Cafe I think she recommended Joanna Toch. That was the recommendation, and the stage that I was in at the time was, as I just sort of briefly mentioned, it was my first court case. And I think you don't know what the process can be. You just get sucked into what the existing go-to process is. And it's, ringing a local solicitor on the high street that you don't know from Adam and regaling your story to someone that doesn't particularly care, and then getting passed to someone else and booking an appointment for 3 weeks' time. But you think that is the way because you've never been in that process before. So you just sort of take that as, oh, this is what happens. And it just took speaking to Joanna and her team to instantly know how different that was. The way they answered the phone, the fact that you could speak to someone that knew your case rather than a receptionist or an appointment booker. Just every touch point of Family Law Cafe was completely different to the normal way of doing it. The case space where you could just, instead of emailing someone's email address and waiting for a response to say, oh, thanks for that form you've sent through, or thanks for that bit of evidence you've sent through, the case space was just the ability to put something on and get engagement straight away. Thanks for that. No need to worry about that. Okay, I'll prepare that for next week, or don't worry about that for a couple of months, or thanks for that evidence you've dropped off. You got affirmation that you're on the step and doing the right thing, rather than waiting for the phone to call or someone to call you back, or, as I said, speaking to a receptionist. Every element of it was completely different and completely refreshing and completely empowering. And luckily I was introduced to Joanna to experience that. But I think there's millions of people going through the former and thinking that's the only way to do it. And that's why I'm here today, talking to these cameras and talking to you, to make sure that people do know there is a different way, a much better way, a much more empowering way, and a lot cheaper, actually.
Even cheaper.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. Well, thank you very much for sharing that. That's really interesting. And if I may, I would like to draw a parallel to the conveyancing process that we are looking at.
Sure.
Very often, people also, buyers and sellers of property mainly, engage into this process, and what they're really looking for is an outcome. They want to move on to the next chapter in their life. They want to move to a different city or to a different neighborhood, put their kids in the school. That's what they want. And what they get is an endless process. An endless process that is sort of intransparent, opaque, not always very well run. And they get frustrated, and they don't understand why it takes so long. And very often there's no really good answer to that anyway. So is that a fair comparison in terms of what you experience in terms of process?
I think it is. Yeah, I think it is. I mean, I don't know much about what you guys do, but I believe that is going to be covered in much more detail once I've gone. But I like the sound of what you're doing. I mean, I have a friend at the moment, and you tell me if this is right or wrong. I have a friend at the moment that's about to go through a divorce, or is going to divorce. They own quite a considerable property, but the problem is they both want to go their separate ways. But the wife believes that the property's worth 1.4 million, and the man believes the property's worth 1.8 million. And is this all about trying to find the right price for the right house that both people agree on, so they can actually move on with their lives? Is this something around what you do?
Yes, so Conveyo completely rethinks the conveyancing process, very much like Law Cafe does it with the family law matters.
Yeah.
So we introduce technology to a process that is antiquated, and we actually have people caring about your case and handling your case. So we know when you call who you are and where your case is, so maybe just to sum it up, what we do at Conveyo is we provide a much more client-centric, client-focused process than the rest of the conveyancing world. And to come to your specific example, we often work with buyers and sellers, or mostly sellers of properties that are in need to urgently sell their asset, for example, in divorce cases. So part of what we do is, in these situations, we prepare the property for the transaction ahead of it actually hitting the market, so that when it then hits the market, it can actually be transacted much more quickly and much more efficiently than in the standard process. And yes, we can also help with the price finding. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Well, I've been told to wrap up, so let's wrap up. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Matt. It was a pleasure.